What you're about to hear is more than a headline. It's a moment, raw, unexpected, explosive, that cut through a congressional hearing like a thunderclap. A decorated former police officer, a conservative activist known for conspiracy-laden protests, wealth, power, grief, memory, anger, all colliding in one of the most closely watched political arenas in the world, the U.S. House Judiciary Committee hearing on January 22nd, 2026. And when someone tried to extend a hand, something far darker happened. Go, slowly, fuck yourself. Those were the first words uttered by a man whose life was forever changed on January 6th, 2021. Years of trauma explodes in an instant. This is not political theater. This is something deeply human, and it matters. Stay with us. By the end of this video, you'll not only know what happened, you'll begin to understand why it feels like America's past has erupted inside its present. January 22nd, 2026. Inside a tense House Judiciary Committee hearing, the centerpiece of high-stakes testimony by former Trump Special Counsel Jack Smith, something extraordinary occurred. During a recess, when the cameras were still rolling, the world was watching live. A confrontation erupted between small blue diamond Michael Fanone, former D.C. police officer who answered the call on January 6th, 2021, was savagely beaten by the mob and has since become one of the most powerful voices on the January 6th saga, and small blue diamond Ivan Raiklin, a conservative activist, election denial promoter, and frequent Capitol Hill presence, whose ideological clashes with Fanone represent tensions running deep within the American psyche. A simple attempt to interact turned into chaos. Profanities flew. Accusations were hurled. Law enforcement officers, allies, and former brothers-in-arms rushed in to restrain Fanone. And for a moment, the world watched what many described as a near-physical altercation inside the chambers of Congress. This is where today's story begins. To understand the moment, we have to understand the man. Michael Fanone is not just a name in headlines. He is a symbol of the violence, trauma, and enduring emotional cost of January 6th. On that day, Fanone was self-deployed to the U.S. Capitol, responding to a distress call, even though he wasn't scheduled to be on duty. What happened next changed his life forever. He was dragged down the Capitol steps into the heart of the mob. He was beaten with flagpoles and metal poles. He was stunned repeatedly with a taser. Smoke and chemical irritants clouded his vision. Rioters tried to take his firearm from him. At one point, in the chaos, his heart stopped. He was knocked unconscious, and he suffered a traumatic brain injury. Recovery was long, brutal, both physically and emotionally. The scars weren't just physical. Fanone battled PTSD. He lost his career in law enforcement. He became one of the most visible critics of the January 6th attack and those who seek to minimize it. He testified before the Congressional January 6th Select Committee with emotion, courage, and unflinching honesty, recounting the violence he endured. Today, he remains a public figure, a man who carries both the badge and the weight of that day's fury. Ivan Raiklin is a stark contrast. He is a self-described activist who has centered himself within the pro-Trump election denial movement. His presence at Capitol Hill events has never been subtle. He frequently appears to protest the outcome of the 2020 election. His views align with narratives rejected by courts, investigators, and fact-checkers alike, that the election was fraudulent. Raiklin is known for his provocative style. He courts confrontation and media attention, often by design. Put simply, the two men represent opposing worlds. Fanone, the man who fought the mob. Raiklin, the man who defends the narrative that fueled it. The setting was already electric. A House Judiciary Committee hearing centered on the work and testimony of Jack Smith, the special counsel tasked with high-profile investigations into the former president and others. The political stakes were huge. Partisan fault lines were laid bare. Fanone, seated among former law enforcement officers, was a live witness to both the violence of January 6th and the political battles that ensued. Raiklin, standing nearby, inserted himself into that world. This was not some accidental subway encounter. When Raiklin attempted to shake Fanone's hand during a break, something beneath the surface snapped. The reaction was instantaneous. According to eyewitnesses and video streamed live, Raiklin approaches. He speaks. He offers a handshake. Fanone responds with profanity. Not just any profanity, words charged with decades of pain. Go F yourself. Fanone then reportedly said to Raiklin, "Don't pretend like we're not mortal enemies." The exchange escalates. Raiklin taunts him, challenging his composure, even mocking a neurological condition. Capitol Police officers rush in. Former Officer Harry Dunn, himself a January 6th figure, pulls Fanone back. But the verbal barrage continues. Fanone loudly accuses Raiklin of threatening his family, even going so far as to say Raiklin threatened to rape his children. Those words, raw, shocking, heartbreaking, hung in the air like a physical weight. Capitol Police, finally controlling the situation, guided Fanone back to his seat. Raiklin left the room shortly after. That was the moment, but it wasn't the end. Even after the immediate confrontation, the atmosphere did not cool. Fanone, coughing, reportedly added another profane remark as the hearing resumed. This time at Representative Troy Nehls, who was speaking in defense of Trump and away from the narrative held by Democrats and Fanone himself. The tension was sharper than garlic smoke in a sealed room. What was meant to be a procedural hearing turned into something much deeper. This was not simply political disagreement. This was emotion pouring out. Pause for a minute. Ask yourself, why is this viral moment trending worldwide? It's not because two grown men argued. It's because those two men represent something deeper. January 6th, 2021 shattered more than windows. It fractured American trust. Fanone embodies the trauma of that day and the sacrifices of law enforcement. His reaction wasn't political theater. It was emotional history surfacing in real time. This wasn't just Republicans versus Democrats. This was experience versus belief. Raiklin represents a faction that denies the facts of 2020, downplays the violence of January 6th, and champions contention. Fanone represents the weight of consequence, a man who lived it, suffered for it, and refuses to forget. Politicians often speak in talking points. Experts cite policies. But this confrontation was human. Pain, anger, fear, protection, all in one moment. A man defending his family. A man defending a version of truth. Whether you agree or disagree, you feel it. The reactions have been immediate. Democrats on the committee expressed support for Fanone. Republicans have attempted to shift focus to broader political themes. Commentators on both sides have taken to social media, many defending Fanone's emotional response, others condemning the breakdown of decorum. Viewers around the world are watching not just politics, but psychology. This wasn't a scripted moment. This was human behavior, unfiltered. So where do we go from here? A few scenarios are emerging. 1. Legal scrutiny of the exchange. Will law enforcement or congressional ethics committees investigate? 2. Political fallout. Will this incident deepen partisan divides or spark bipartisan calls for civility? 3. Emotional leadership. Will Fanone's outburst spark empathy or criticism for how trauma manifests? 4. Broader impact on January 6th discourse. Instead of abstract debate, the world saw a man scarred by violence. That changes public perception. What we witnessed inside that hearing room wasn't just a spat. It was a collision between memory and ideology, between lived trauma and political narrative, between the human heart and the system of politics. In those few seconds, on live video, broadcast to millions, the United States saw itself in a mirror. And what it saw was not just anger, but hurt. That matters, because in every nation's history, the moments that endure are not the ones that stay calm, but the ones that feel real. And this moment, raw, electrifying, unforgettable, will be talked about for years to come. If you thought that confrontation was just a moment of anger, just a flash of temper, just two men losing control inside a hearing room, then you missed what really happened. Because what exploded between Michael Fanone and Ivan Raiklin wasn't just rage. It was history. It was trauma. It was denial colliding with memory. And in many ways, it was America arguing with itself. Almost immediately after the video went viral, a familiar question started echoing across social media and cable news panels. Did Michael Fanone go too far? Was his behavior inappropriate for a congressional hearing? Did he embarrass himself? On the surface, those questions sound reasonable, but only if you strip away everything that came before that moment. Only if you pretend January 6th never happened. Only if you pretend trauma has an off switch. Because Michael Fanone is not reacting to Ivan Raiklin the man. He's reacting to what Raiklin represents, a worldview that tells him what happened to you didn't really matter. What you went through was exaggerated. The people who nearly killed you were patriots, not criminals. That's not politics. That's psychological warfare on a trauma survivor. And when Raiklin walked up and casually offered a handshake, as if they were equals on opposite sides of a polite debate, that wasn't reconciliation. To Fanone's nervous system, that was provocation. That was erasure. That was someone stepping into his personal hell and pretending the fire never existed. So when Fanone snapped, it wasn't random. It was stored pain finally finding a target. Here's something rarely discussed on TV. Trauma doesn't stay neatly in the past. It lives in the body. It hides in the nervous system. It waits for reminders. For combat veterans, it can be fireworks. For assault survivors, it can be a smell or a voice. For Michael Fanone, it's men who minimize January 6th. It's people who defend the mob. It's activists who call the rioters political prisoners. Every time Fanone hears that language, his brain doesn't process it as politics. It processes it as danger, threat, re-entry into a moment where he almost died. So when Raiklin mocked him, challenged him, and dismissed his reality, Fanone's body reacted before his logic could. That's not weakness. That's what trauma does. And suddenly, inside one of the most formal rooms in American democracy, you saw something brutally real. Not a pundit, not a politician, not a witness reading prepared remarks. You saw a wounded human being defending his reality. Supporters of Ivan Raiklin rushed to social media with a very specific framing. He was being polite. He was trying to make peace. He just offered a handshake. But context matters. Raiklin is not a neutral figure. He has publicly promoted narratives that deny the legitimacy of the 2020 election. He has repeatedly portrayed January 6th defendants as heroes. He has accused law enforcement and prosecutors of corruption. And he has personally targeted January 6th officers online. So when a man like that walks up to Michael Fanone, inside a hearing about Jack Smith and January 6th accountability, and sticks out his hand, that is not a peace gesture. That is a power move. It's a way of saying, I'm standing here. I'm unbothered. Your trauma didn't stop me. Your story didn't win. That's why Fanone said what he said. Don't pretend we're not mortal enemies. That line wasn't metaphorical. It was psychological truth. Because in Fanone's mind, Raiklin belongs to the same moral universe as the men who dragged him down the Capitol steps. Then came the most chilling moment. Fanone shouted that Raiklin had threatened his family, even using the words, rape my children. Now pause right there. If that accusation is true, this is no longer about decorum or tempers. This becomes a criminal-level moral collapse. Threatening someone's children is not politics. It's terrorization. And even if Raiklin denies it, the fact that Fanone believes it happened tells you how deep and personal this conflict already was. This was not their first encounter. This was not some random hallway clash. There is a history here, a history of online harassment, of stalking-style behavior, of targeted intimidation, which means what we witnessed wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the boiling point. This clip didn't go viral just because it was dramatic. It went viral because it shattered a lie. The lie that America has moved on from January 6th. The lie that the wounds have healed. The lie that everyone is just disagreeing politely now. No, this country is still bleeding from that day. And Fanone versus Raiklin turned that invisible wound into a visible one. Suddenly, millions of Americans weren't watching an abstract debate about democracy. They were watching a man who almost died being mocked by a man who denies why it happened. That hit something primal in people. Even viewers who hate Fanone politically felt the rawness of his pain. Even viewers who support Trump felt the intensity of that moment. Because you can fake outrage. You can't fake trauma like that. Another detail people noticed. After the confrontation, most Republican leaders said nothing. No condemnation. No call for civility. No defense of Fanone's right to exist in that space. Just silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Because calling out Raiklin would mean admitting something uncomfortable, that the movement he belongs to has created a culture where threatening, mocking, and dehumanizing opponents is not only tolerated, it's rewarded. So instead of addressing that reality, leaders chose to pretend the moment never happened. But the internet doesn't forget, and neither does Fanone. Here's the part nobody on cable news wants to say out loud. This confrontation makes reconciliation almost impossible because it exposed something too raw to smooth over. There is no shared reality anymore. One side says January 6th was an insurrection that nearly killed officers. The other side says January 6th was a misunderstood protest. Those two realities cannot coexist peacefully, and Fanone versus Raiklin proved that. This wasn't debate. This was incompatible moral universes colliding in physical space, which means the politics of January 6th are not cooling down. They are heating up, and as more trials, investigations, and hearings continue, moments like this will happen again. Some Democrats are quietly worried. They're asking, did this outburst hurt the credibility of January 6th victims? Did Fanone hand ammunition to the right? Short answer, yes and no. Yes, because his language will now be weaponized. Clips will be edited. Context will be stripped. He will be portrayed as unstable. But no, because something far more powerful happened. He reminded the country that January 6th wasn't theoretical. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't a culture war meme. It was physical violence. And people who survive violence don't always behave politely afterward. That's not a PR failure. That's reality. Strip away names in politics. What were we really watching? A man who lived through extreme violence being confronted by someone who denies that violence mattered. That dynamic exists far beyond Washington. It exists between police and communities, soldiers and war skeptics, abuse survivors and their doubters of victims and denialists. That's why this moment felt bigger than Congress. Because millions of people recognized themselves in Fanone. Not politically, emotionally. Narrator, slow, quiet. Heavy. What happened between Michael Fanone and Ivan Raiklin was not a breakdown of democracy. It was a warning that America has unresolved trauma, a warning that denial has consequences, a warning that pretending wounds are healed doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them explode later, in worse ways, in more dangerous places. That hearing room wasn't just a room. It was a pressure cooker. And on that day, the lid finally blew off. If this story unsettled you, that's not a bug. That's the point. Because until this country finds a way to confront January 6th honestly, this will not be the last explosion.